Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Earl Chostner. I fought in World War I, or the Great War as it was known then. Raised my family here in Pueblo, and much of my posterity still call Pueblo home today. Now, contrary to what your little program there says, I get real uncomfortable when people call me a war hero. Hero? Me? I just did what needed to be done. I guess I was what you might call a citizen soldier. You see, the United States did not have a huge standing army of trained soldiers in 1917, so when America entered the war, men my age felt like we'd been called. So, we showed up. I volunteered about 3 months after the United States declared war. I served in the 405th Battalion of Telegraphers. Now I know what some of you are probably thinking. A telegrapher? What in the Sam Hill is that? Well, it used to be, back in 1917, that the telegraph was the cutting edge of communication. Sort of like a modern day, what do you call it, a text message? Actually, it was my skills with the telegraph that brought me to Pueblo in the first place. I worked for the Rock Island Railway. The Army had need of men who could operate and send telegrams, so my skills were in high demand. I went to Washington and trained at Fort Lewis, but nothing truly prepares a man for battle. Shipped off to France and eventually found myself at the Battle of Mihiel. Now, I would never want to disturb any of you with stories of that battle, but suffice it to say, that was the battle that turned the tide of the war. It marked the first time that our boys rose up out of the trenches and charged forward on the offensive against the German lines. It was a hot battle, too. And if you're sitting here thinking that I was snug as a bug at the back of the line, sending messages on my little telegram, well, you've got the wrong idea. At one point, our division was advancing forward. We crossed a bridge. We turned to look behind us, and that bridge got hit so hard with artillery fire that the entire bridge just disappeared. And except for a few steps of ours, we'd have gone with it. Now, I tried to downplay the experiences of war when riding home. My girl, Vera, she later became my wife. She was here in Pueblo, and we wrote each other constantly. I wrote her about the armistice. It was planned, as you may know, for the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. Now, I'll never understand it, but the hours leading up to the armistice, right before, those were some of the worst hours of artillery fire any of us had ever endured. But the moment that 11th hour began, the guns fell silent. A great quiet descended on the battlefield. Quiet that was stunning coming after the boom of war. Quiet that sunk deep into your bones. Even the birds felt it as they cautiously made their way over the scarred and battle-torn land that had been the scene of such carnage. When I looked up and saw those birds flying overhead where previously had only been missiles, I began to think that perhaps God would begin to heal the great tear in the earth that man had created through war. We slowly came out of our defensive positions and actually began to mingle with the German soldiers who'd been our enemies moments before. They looked terrible, hungry, battle-weary, many of them not more than boys. I traded my food rations to a hungry German soldier for his helmet, brought that helmet home as a memento. My grandson Jeff still has that helmet today. Now, as you might imagine, it took quite some time to get all of us home after the armistice, what with there being 1.2 million Americans serving in France. 2 weeks later, on Thanksgiving Day, I was still stuck in France. I introduced myself to a new acquaintance. He looked at me funny and goes, "Chostner? Now that's a name you don't hear every day, and here I met another Chostner just the other day. Now what do you think of that?" Well, I was curious to meet the man he'd met who had my name, so I asked him to point out the area of camp whereabouts he thought he'd met him. He did so. I went over and made some inquiries, and do you know what? It was my brother Ezra. I knew he was fighting in France, of course, but I had no idea of his whereabouts, and here we'd found each other on Thanksgiving Day amongst these millions of men. There were over 3,000 men just from Pueblo County serving in France. It was a true blessing for Ezra and I to have found each other and to spend Thanksgiving Day together. Now, before leaving France, I did the important things like purchasing a set of Haviland china as a wedding gift for my soon-to-be bride. Vera and I were married in 1920. She was a Pueblo girl. We built our life here. She was a singer. Opened a music store. I eventually helped start the Midwest Business College. I taught courses in, would you believe it, how to use the telegraph. My skills were still in high demand. Tried to do my best, both in the war and with my family. Tried to teach my children and grandchildren to show up when they're called, to stand up for those who need standing up for. Hero? Me? Suppose a poem written about the men who fought in World War I sums it up best for me. We who are left, how shall we look again happily on the sun or feel the rain, and not remember how they who went ungrudgingly and spent their all for us loved too the sun and rain? Thank you folks for your time.
Thank you.